Good morning and welcome to A Piece for Peace. Today we're going to be talking about what do you do when you cannot see the forest from the trees. You know, when everything looks the same and you're on a path and you're not quite sure where the path is leading, so after a while you stop trusting it, and maybe if you've been lost in your forest for a while and all you see is trees, lack of self-confidence, irritability, all of those kinds of things begin to settle in, negative self-talk, and it's not very long before all you want to do is just sort of stop and hunker down, and yet you know you've got to keep walking because you can't stay here, it won't sustain you. What do you do under those conditions? That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about a 3-step process that I kind of dreamed up this weekend. And it's going to start with understanding the relationship between anger and sadness in times like this, because I think it's changed compared to what we would understand under different conditions. And the second is to understand what kind of an inventory, what kind of self-thinking and examination we might be doing that would be helpful, and then what to do with that list. So, first thing we're going to talk about this morning is what about this relationship between anger and sadness, and why are we talking about it? Understanding the relationship between anger and sadness is tied to something called bypassing, whether it's spiritual bypassing or bypassing shame or bypassing things that scare us, bypassing guilt, but the idea of trying to circumvent something by going around it rather than trying to figure out a way to pass through it. And sometimes bypassing will work for a short amount of time, right? We just pretend like something is not there, hope it passes, and then we can move through it. And we all know that back in April and May, that's what we were hoping, and here we are in September, and we know that things are settling in a different kind of a way. So bypassing doesn't work anymore. Pre-COVID conditions, pre-protracted grief conditions, we could say that sadness and we could say that anger are flip sides of the same thing. And that's tied to the fight or flight mechanism. Something happens to me, it causes me pain, it causes me distress, I have a mechanism to keep myself safe from that threat. I can either fight it, which is the anger expression, or I can run from it, which is the sadness expression. And it takes a bit of both, right, for us to be balanced. We can understand that. And if we're stuck in the middle where we can't do either, then that, by definition, is what trauma is all about. And when it persists, it bakes its way into our minds and into our bodies in a whole bunch of different small ways, which I think now changes the relationship between anger and sadness. So I'm going to explain to you in a second why anger is a trigger for you to stop, get in touch with your sadness, and do this inventory. So what does that look like? Well, now I think that anger is a way of masking the sadness, because when I'm walking this path and I'm still not quite sure where I'm headed, after a while that begins to weigh on me. And so the anger is the adrenaline that I need to keep pushing through. But I can't forever be pushing through and lugging this sadness along with me about why I'm stuck in this forest in the first place, because eventually that's just going to weigh me down, and then I'm just going to stop and I'll be stuck. So the lesson in this first phase is that when there is too much anger that's welling up in you, and I've heard stories over the last couple of weeks with the pastoral work that I've been doing about people who are becoming increasingly frustrated with themselves and with other people, and are beginning to maybe even lash out in ways that they're not quite sure they like. And they've had people lash out at them that they're definitely sure that they don't like. So when that happens, it's a sure sign to stop and take some inventory. Now the second piece of that inventory, or that second phase, doing the inventory, this is actually the simplest part. What I'm going to suggest you do is that when it's time to take inventory, you make a list, either in your mind or on a piece of paper or just by recording something, of all the different things that are really beginning to stress you out. The big things, the little things. The big things are, maybe you've got kids at home and you don't know how to manage them. Maybe you are a student, you don't know how you're going to make your year. Maybe you've got financial troubles through work. All of those kinds of things. And as hard as that is, you gotta put that down and on paper and get it out there. But there's also all the little things that glom on. Write those down too. I had a supervisor, a teacher, that once told me, he said, Eric, when you're carrying a heavy load, it's not that load that actually does you in. It's trying to swat all the flies. So write everything down on that list. That actually probably, won't be such a difficult thing once you get your mind moving, but you may be surprised at how long it is and how many little things that we are all carrying that get on our nerves. Big things and little things. The flies, right, that we're swatting while we're carrying the heavy load. And the last thing is, what do you do with that list? Well, because it has to be triaged. And so we're going to use that very famous quadrant of saying there are things that are urgent and important, there are things that are important but not urgent, there are things that seem urgent but are not important, and there are things that are definitely not urgent and definitely not important. Urgent and important, important but not urgent, things that seem urgent but are definitely not important, not urgent, not important. And I think that kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it? We know the difference between things that seem urgent and are not important. And I think that a lot of our anger is coming out of that third one. Because often the things that seem urgent come from two different places in general. Either people who have imposed upon us and we don't know how to say no, or the negative self-talk that goes on in our heads. So, check your anger and make sure that when there's too much of it welling up, that it is not really a way of bypassing your sadness, and use it as a sign to do your inventory. Do your inventory. Do your inventory. And finally, use that quadrant. All right. Thanks for being with me today. Be blessed, be a blessing, so that together we can say that we got this, and enjoy your walk in the woods. Bye.